Hello, and thanks for your audience. This is a discussion of a quick research project that I did with my high school students where I teach. Um, the study is titled "Impact of My Math Lab Homework Utility on Success for High School College Algebra Students." We're going to examine the impact of a particular virtual homework environment on the performance on summative and formative assessments for a group of high school seniors. Let's begin with a quick description of My Math Lab. It is a very popular Pearson product, Pearson being the large US textbook publisher. You may be familiar with it before you had a look at this presentation, but in case you're not, there's a couple of highlights that warrant mentioning. First of all, the textbook itself is titled Essentials of College Algebra. The hardbook version you can see there on the left side of your screen. It is a rather famous textbook. The author herself is Margaret Lyle, a lifelong or at least career educator, quite some, let's say mild fame, and one who's contributed quite a bit to high school math education. You can read her biography, sadly passed away earlier this year, but not before leaving a great legacy behind to us who teach high school math. The utility adapts the textbook rather directly into an online format. It does present the textbook in a PDF form for all of the users. The school district where I work, Cypher ISD, has provided an online textbook to everyone who enters my class for free. So this is a study on students who have universal access to the product. There's not there would be no selection bias for students who do and don't have access. Here is a summary of research that treats differing online homework utilities. I've chosen a couple of articles from. At the end of this presentation, you'll see about a dozen or so great resources to read if you're considering whether or not to implement a virtual homework environment for your classroom. Here are a couple of highlights. First, you have D. Sirhan, who wrote about whether not so much about the efficacy of a virtual homework platform, but more to the point of what student perception was. Sirhan was able to conclude that students had a generally positive view. They noted that the ease of access um, and the nuanced feedback that they received from the product that they were using was the chief benefit. Because when over the process of this study, because Sirhan received such positive feedback from the students, it was concluded that that web-based homework platforms were positive, uh, were were to the advantage of students doing that. This is This is a study based on My Math Lab, which is the product that we'll be discussing, but also one called WebAssign. Bird, who wrote about a freshman summer tutoring program, also included My Math Lab in her study. But here it was more of a general survey of. Let us suppose that you're a freshman attending Indiana University, which is not one of the universities included in this study, but let's say that you're attending Indiana University. It may be the case that your high school coursework in mathematics does not support your entry into a pre-engineering program. If that was the case and you were admitted with the plan of doing that, you'd be admitted into what would be called the Emerge program. The Emerge program is designed to raise by one grade level the math understandings of incoming freshmen for this particular university. This was a highly successful program. You see on screen there that 73% and 71%, respectively, for 2014 and 2015 of participants were able to advance one course in their math program. And My Math Lab specifically was an important utility towards doing this. So, based on the research, which you're invited to visit as well, but which I've surveyed, and a dozen sources at the end of this, if you care to look at them. I predicted in advance of these observations that students would have a statistically significant to a p-value less than 5.05 improvement in what we would classify as completion rates, mastery rates, and summative test scores. First of all, why did I believe this? From personal experiences as a student and as an instructor, MyMathLab has several advantages over paper and pen homework. First of all, as a student, you cannot forget your textbook at home if you are a MyMathLab student. You are overwhelmingly likely to have a smartphone, and everywhere your smartphone goes, MyMathLab goes with you. Interface with MyMathLab on a smartphone is reasonably accurate, and after a short learning curve, very convenient. When you give answers on MyMathLab, the feedback is often tailored to specific mistakes that the students make, and forgive me, the feedback is tailored to specific student errors, and also a student who makes a mistake over and over again is offered the chance to reattempt a question that is procedurally generated random numbers inserted into the same problem, so they can follow the same methodology but successfully answer the question. Finally, because of the random nature of the values that are entered into each problem, no two students are seeing the exact same homework problem. This discourages dishonesty and cheating on the homework. Okay, I assigned categories of grades to each student product. So they compared neatly to the paper and pencil questions and from a previous year and a previous generation of students. For the benefit of the viewer, I would like to mention that this is a rather controlled experiment. The questions that you see on the MyMathLab utility are borrowed directly from the text, as I said earlier, with random values substituted for the values of the original publication. So they're also associated individually, synced one-to-one with the numbers of the problems. I was able, because of that perfect match, to assign the exact assignment that my students from last year had to this year's student. I classed the work slightly differently last year than I have for this year. Last year, students were expected to be over 70% accurate and 100% complete in order to earn full credit or a 100 in the grade book. So when you see whatever average you see for later on when we look at the results for last year's study, those grades were based on that rubric. Students last year per campus policy had a 15-point per day penalty. So a student who made an 85 likely had an assignment that was 100% complete, had a few mistakes on it, and was turned in 1 day late. Students could continue turning work in a day after day late for a 15-point penalty per day and had a floor of a 50 as long as they turned the work in before the test. Because MyMathLab grades the work for the instructor, but because also there were small issues concerning the placement of a decimal point or if there was a space in the answer, I gave students the grade that they were assigned by MathLab, with the only change being that a student's grade was rounded up to the next generation by 10-point intervals to whatever they would have made. So a student who makes an 83, you see here on the screen, would have received a 90, and a student who originally made a 47 would have gotten a 50. And this went all the way down. If you made an 11, you got a 20. If you made a 92, you got 100. It's still at a 15-point per day penalty, and it could still be turning all the way up to the test. I need to qualify what success meant based on the grades that the students earned. When they submitted work for a 0 to a 50, this meant either it was incomplete or that it showed that they had no understanding of the material. That was the same last year as this. Last year, as this year, a 51 to a 70 was classed as unsatisfactory. The material was either showed a lagging understanding that it was happening much later than it was intended, scheduled for them to understand the material, or that it was far below, underpassing, or incomplete in some fashion. Generally, a 71 to an 89 showed complete and adequate work. This is a student who turned in their work a day late last year, or who missed a couple of questions on MATLAB and chose not to attempt them over and over again until they got them correct this year. So, observations. This graph shows both the results from the paper and pen homework last year, as well as in blue, the MyMathLab homework this year. These are the non-participation or incomplete or under 50 percentiles under 50 percentages for the class. Here at the very left-hand side, you can see that last year for the sample size, which was, by the way, 32 last year, 29 this year. That is 32 paper, 29 MyMathLab. There was 100% completion for the first 2 homework assignments. So you see a 0% incomplete rate for the paper test last year. Attributable to, let's say, a learning curve with the technology, there was a very low, it looks as though about 4% incomplete rate for MyMathLab. Here are the unsatisfactory percentages for both MathLab and paper. Also, at the beginning, you see a learning curve with the technology meant that MyMathLab had a higher unsatisfactory rate at the very beginning, first 2 homework assignments. However, again, you see a lower incidence of unsatisfactory work throughout the remainder of the semester. The mastery percentage, those students who scored above an 85%, again, was lower at the very beginning, but higher throughout the remainder of the year. Did these translate into higher summative scores? They absolutely did. On this slide, you see that the exam averages for the first 4 grades, and in each of the first 4, with the exception of the second, MyMathLab generated a higher test average. Not only that, but as I mentioned, controls, they were very carefully installed for this study. My tests were procedurally generated from last year's numbers. Just like the MyMathLab homework assignments are generated as random numbers from the textbook, my tests this year were generated by replacing the figures and the values from last year's homework with random values using a random number generator. All of the questions were identical except for the values used, with one exception. My teaching partner and I decided to replace a 80% success multiple choice question with a 20% success rate short answer question for this year. For that reason, you'll see a row on the left that says MyMathLab Adjusted. The MyMathLab Adjusted is adjusted with a 4-point curve to compensate for that additional level of difficulty that this year's students faced that last year's didn't. When accounting for that 4-point change, there was a p-value of 0.016, which is well below my 0.05 threshold for a p-value. We did conclude that there was a statistically significant improvement in summative test data based on a MathLab program and strict controls elsewhere for the curriculum. So, a great testimonial for the MyMathLab product. Based on my study, I would highly recommend using this for any other high school college algebra classroom. I can't show that this benefit would apply to other topics, but I expected it would, because my justifications for this outcome were not narrowly tailored to a college algebra curriculum. If you'd like to read more about a MyMathLab or other online homework utilities, I can recommend all of these resources. They were consulted for this presentation. I thank you very much for your viewership, and I hope that you've gained from your audience. Thank you very much.